of the Baker Street Irregulars. Thank you, Kimberly, for joining us today. And last but not least, we have Michael Whistler. He is the author and award-winning filmmaker behind several sci-fi short films. He hosts the podcast Exploring Tomorrow, Meaningful Sci-Fi and Life's Big Questions. He was born in Brazil, South America, where he spent most of his childhood, and he now lives on the South Shore of Boston, where he works as a documentary filmmaker and story design consultant. A firm believer that science fiction can help create a better tomorrow, he seeks to encourage thoughtful engagement with limitless genres. Thank you, Michael, for joining us today. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you. So The Talking Drum is my book right here. The Talking Drum is about three young couples and how they're affected when an urban development project takes over a neighborhood. I have a young couple who are opening up a bookstore, and in the neighborhood they're in, they think they're going to benefit from this urban redevelopment gentrification that's going to happen in a neighboring neighborhood. There's also a man across the street who is a mover and shaker. He seems to know the mayor very well. He is flashy. He just seems to be kind of shady and has his hands in a lot of different directions. And so people don't know whether to actually trust him or not. So he's an interesting character. I also have his girlfriend who does not think that she can trust him because she thinks that he's fooling around with other women, but she's not really sure. And she has a daughter who's having some emotional issues that it's going to take some time to uncover what those are. I also have an African drummer who is a musician. He dreams of being the drumming ambassador of the world, and he's not really paying attention to his marriage and doesn't know how to love his wife, and they were having some marital issues. It's also his best friend who he does drumming with. They do these drumming performances, but his best friend can drum on the African drum, the talking drum, in a way that makes the women swoon when they go on stage. And so Omar, this character, is jealous of his best friend. And there's Natalie, the wife of Omar, who is unhappy in the marriage. There's also a very strange man, a Vietnam veteran, who's walking around. He pops up every so often with his German Shepherd, and we don't know why. And there's also someone who's unseen. There's an arsonist who's burning down properties, whether he's a firebug and just he or she's a firebug and just loves to see things burn, or there's some other motivations. We just don't know. And gentrification is at the center of my novel. I found that I've been having a lot of conversations with people in which they were telling me that their old neighborhood is not the same. It's been redone. It's gone upscale. They've lost the sense of the neighborhood. And I had those conversations over and over with enough people that I thought this could be a good pin to pin my novel on. In fact, my parents experienced that in my hometown in Bridgeport, Connecticut. There's a lot of changes going on now, and they owned and operated a business. And we saw the customer base reduced because the waterfront was being taken over, and the people who lived there, the working class people, were moved out, and that was part of the customer base. So we saw some changes there, which helped to inspire my story. And just to say, I wanted to write a novel since I was a child. I was one of those bookworms who was always in the house on sunny days, and my mother would say to me, "Go outside, Lisa, and get some fresh air and go out and play with the kids in the neighborhood." But I would say, "Oh no, mommy, I want to be inside. I want to be a novelist. I just love reading." And she said, "Well, that's wonderful, Lisa, but you can't earn a living writing books." So I went into journalism for years, radio, television, newspapers. And it was good to get the discipline of writing all the time, learning those skills, working with editors. But I found that it was so fast paced and so intense that I didn't have the time to work on creative writing. So once I left the journalism field and went into nonprofit work, I began to do some writing. And I entered Southern New Hampshire University's MFA program. And to get your degree, you have to produce a novel, which I did. And I graduated in 2010. And I've been shopping my novel, The Talking Drum, around for a long time. And so 2020, last year, it got published. So it only took me 10 years from finishing the novel to getting it published. So that's another story. But I'm going to read a little bit from chapter 3, in which we see how Omar, the drummer, and Natalie and his wife are having some marital problems. And part of the problem is because of this urban redevelopment that's going to take their property and is causing stress on their marriage. I'll read a little bit of this. Omar Basari read the notice that his wife, Natalie, held inches from his nose. The Basaris had to pay 3 months back rent by the end of the month, including late fees, or be evicted. Él es un idiot, Omar muttered as he returned his attention to the peanut paste he had cooking on the stove. Fullerton, that's the landlord, Fullerton does not care a fig about us. Natalie flung the notice along with the rest of the day's mail and her canvas book bag onto the kitchen counter. An accounting textbook, the Bellport Gazette, and some sheet music slid out. She pulled at the sleeves of her goose-down jacket and hung it on a hook in the hallway. I knew a rent strike was a bad idea, she fumed. Why did you listen to those people? The Basaris rented a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the Commonwealth Arms, a pre-World War I building on King Street in the heart of Petite Africa, owned by a white businessman, James Fullerton. They'd moved there 6 months ago when a fire burned down their 3-story rooming house on the corner of Pleasant and Garfield Avenues, 5 blocks away. Omar's uncle Mustafa had found them their first apartment a year and a half ago when the couple moved to town after they both dropped out of Howard University in Washington, D.C. After the fire, Mustafa stepped in again, negotiating a reduced price from Fullerton for the couple to live at the Commonwealth Arms. This allowed Omar to cover most of the household expenses with the $30 to $40 a week he averaged from his drumming performances. Natalie was studying to be an accountant, but dreamed of acting in theater and film. She had white classmates at Bellport College who got experience and a little extra money doing bit parts in TV commercials, but casting companies rarely chose Black performers, so she settled for jobs doing voiceovers and jingles for radio. She barely made enough to pay for a college course and private voice and acting lessons. Little was left over for anything else. The Commonwealth Arms was in worse shape than the other building they lived in. The plumbing backed up. The oil heat worked off and on. To Omar, the building's problems were minor inconveniences. Growing up in Senegal, he knew nothing of utilities, landlords, rent, or groceries. He spent his childhood in the family care, a compound of mud huts with thatched roofs. There was no plumbing, running water, or electricity. Pit toilets were kept at the far end of the care. At sundown, villagers lit paraffin lamps or candles or sat in the dark and told fables. Once, Omar got workers to fix the boiler, but within days it broke down again. He went into Liberty Hill and bought fan heaters for the apartment. Natalie had to heat water on the electric stove for bath water. She complained that they weren't living much better than villagers from his community. Then one night, the elevator broke. Tenants got stuck between floors for hours. Natalie was forced to haul books and groceries up 6 flights. All the tenants were fed up with the conditions. One night they met in the stairwell to vent about the building's problems. They decided on a rent strike. They would not pay Fullerton until repairs were made. Natalie saw the strike as a waste of time. She thought there was no way Fullerton would budge and that she and Omar should simply pack up and move. Declaring the jungle is stronger than the elephant, Omar overruled his wife. Today, all the tenants found eviction notices taped to their doors. On the stove, the peanut paste was beginning to bubble. With a long-handled wooden spoon, Omar scooped up the paste and folded it in with the beef cubes, broth, and tomato paste warming in another pot. Normally, Natalie wouldn't be home in time for dinner, but her appointment with the voice coach had been canceled. To mark the occasion, Omar used some of the tip money from his drum performances and went to Bamba's Africa Food Market down the street to get the ingredients for a mafe, or a groundnut stew, one of the few dishes from his country that Natalie would eat. Being an American, the food was unfamiliar to her. Bamba Tuku was out of goat meat, so Omar was using beef as a substitute. He ordered half the amount the dish called for so he could also buy a jar of herbs he needed. "We shall not let this man chase us from this building," Omar declared. "We have the right to be here and to have good services. He cannot possibly put us all out in the road." Natalie glared at him. "The man has no heart. What does he care?" She lifted the cover and peeked inside the pot, sniffed at the contents, and warmed her nose over the rising steam. Then she whipped around and marched down the hall toward the bedroom. The cowrie shells woven into her braids made light clicking sounds as they bounced against each other. Omar was glad to have her home. Since the fire, she had scheduled more classes, more coaching, and voiceover jobs. He had gotten into the habit of leaving a plate in the oven at night for her. She came to bed when he was asleep and left in the morning before he was awake. She claimed that she was trying to make up for credit she lost when she dropped out of Howard, but he wondered if she was telling the truth. She never talked about the miscarriage. It had happened a few days after the fire. They had little conversation about anything since then, and they no longer touched each other in bed. But tonight would be different if his plan worked. That's it. Thank you. I think Christine is probably next, right?
Yep, I just kind of was waiting. But yeah, I can move right on with this.
Sorry, Christine. Yes, you're up.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, first of all, let me just show you a few book covers. This is Bone Belly. Oh, this isn't going to work with the filter too well. Okay, we'll forget that. And the other now, I have author pages on Facebook and on Amazon. So if you just look at the spelling of my name, Christine Lejeski, you can find those author pages. But if you also go to my publisher, diverterpublishing.com, DIVERTIR publishing.com. And if you go to the store where they're selling books at the publisher's website and open up my book, you will find in the checkout area, you can click on a link to download the first 60 pages free, so you get a try before you buy. I'm going to read a little bit from Bone Belly. This is a man from another century who was snatched out of his life in the midst of committing a horrible and blasphemous sin and thrown into more or less present time in his own personal hell, which of course is in Rhode Island. Where else would it be? He's hideously transformed, and the part I'm going to read is where he just wakes up with almost no memory, and he's beginning to learn about the place he's in and what kind of body he's inhabiting. Here follows a true account of my first 30 days in hell. 1 month later, I still cannot retrieve any memories of exactly how I came to be here. My face and form are monstrous, yet I understand things belonging to the world of men. I know mother and I know father, but I know I could not have had either. I know crime and abomination, but cannot remember any deeds, good or evil, that may be laid to my hideous hands. I know what mercy is, but I am certain I have no right to any. And I know hunger, terrible, gnawing hunger. What life, if any, I might have previously lived, I cannot recall. But in my dreams, dreadful, appalling dreams, I see a man seized by the hair and lacking any will or strength to fight, dragged at a terrifying speed through suffocating blackness. The man is unbecoming. By that I mean he's turning into a formless, undulating mass of clay. Someone else is there in the blackness. I cannot see him, but I know he is unbecoming too. He is filled with a rage that overcomes his terror. He squirms in silent protest, refusing to submit. Then he is gone, and there is only a single gray mass, shivering with terror and awaiting its hideous fate. 30 days ago, I found myself lying on a patch of frozen mud and granulated snow, staring up at bare trees that groaned and bowed before an icy wind. I was naked, freezing, and unbearably hungry. I held my hands up before my eyes. They were skeletal. The skin that stretched across the bones was a yellowed white like the linen of an ancient shroud. The muscles were thin and stringy, and the fingers, they must have measured 7 inches, tapering to blade-like claws. Such monstrous digits could not possibly belong to me. I sat upright and inspected my legs. They were skeletal too, unnaturally long, the feet ending in toes with somewhat shorter claws. The same taut yellowed hide covered the bones. They were aching from the cold. I knew I needed to find shelter quickly, but had no idea where I was or where I should go. Looking around, I could see I was in a thick forest. The ground was a patchwork of slushy snow and muddy ground, the products of a recent thaw. But there was no doubt it was still winter and that the light of day was fast fading. I groped my way through the undergrowth, unable to find a path. More than once I stumbled into the icy water of a swamp. Just after sunset, I found a mound of boulders. Climbing on top, I could make out a mass of shadows among the trees. I discovered it to be the ruins of a house. I felt my way inside, where I found a small interior room. It was cold, but at least there was no wind. I hoped I might sleep, but the awful burning hunger in my belly kept me awake. When daylight returned, I searched the poor lodging for something to eat. There was nothing but dirt and dead spiders. I did find a length of fraying canvas in the cellar. It worked as a poor sort of cloak. Robed in this finery, I set out to look for food. I found nothing I could recognize as food. I startled some deer at the edge of a swamp, and it occurred to me I might try to drag one down to the ground and slash it with my claws. However, my movements with this strange body were so clumsy I did not come close to capturing one. As the deer leaped away in alarm, I somehow remembered that they often dined on twigs when grasses were no longer available. I broke some thin and supple stems off a tree and tried stripping the bark away with my teeth. As I gnawed and chewed, it turned into a bitter mass of pulp in my mouth. I could not stand it and spat it into the swamp. As the water calmed and cleared, I got a glimpse of my face. I could not believe such a countenance was even possible. It was a monstrosity. I crouched on my knees to get a better look. I saw the same yellow-white skin stretched thinly over the prominent bones of a grotesque, oversized skull. There were deep hollows below the eyes and cheekbones. Like the face of famine itself, the eyes burned amber in the sockets. The mouth was wide and thin, with colorless lips that barely hid two rows of pointed, ferocious teeth. My nose was spare and thinly fleshed out with two large delta-shaped nostrils. Stringy yellow hair grew out of the top of my head and tumbled over my shoulders. I longed to shriek in horror, but I could work no sound of any kind out of my throat. Then, as I further inspected my reflection, I understood why. That huge skeletal head sat atop a neck the thickness of a walking stick. Knotted ropes of muscle twisted around the constricted throat, holding up that mass of yellowed bone. I let my head sag to my chest in utter weariness. Then I slowly stood up so I could take in my full reflection. It seemed as though every bone in my chest, arms, legs, hands, and feet stood out in sharp definition. Lean, sinewy cords of muscle kept the body upright. My belly was huge, like a full moon when it first rises. I lifted my belly and turned to one side, trying to see what manner of manhood I possessed. The organs were there, but shriveled and limp, nothing like the virile flesh of men. I collapsed on the bank of the swamp in despair. I somehow knew I had once been a man, but now had become a grotesque parody of God's greatest creation. Soundlessly, I wept. Thick black tears slid down my face and pooled in my supplicating hands. The tears were oily and stank of putrescence. At that moment, I realized I was cursed with two hungers, the burning in my belly and a drive to howl my misery to the world. Beating my terrible fists against my head, I ran on awkward white legs back to my decaying shelter. The night was damp and overcast. The horizon was a deep, impenetrable black. Yet below the lowering cloud cover and beyond the trees, I saw the glow of unnatural light coming from several directions. Bright lanterns moved at amazing speed along paths that blazed with incandescence. The only sense I could make of the scene was that this was a mighty city in hell, perhaps even Lucifer's capital, and I was one of its condemned denizens. Not wishing to be discovered by the demonic creatures that lived here, I quickly retreated to the cellar of my ruined hovel. I decided I would let myself starve to death. I held out for 2 days, but my belly hurt so badly I was driven forth at last to find sustenance. I was determined to bring down a deer. Somehow I knew the pre-dawn hours were the best time to hunt, so I hid myself in the rushes of the swamp and waited for the deer to come and drink. I lay flat in the freezing mud, barely breathing until the whitetail stood next to me. I wrapped my bony arms around her neck and grappled with the doe until I brought her crashing down. I used the long nail on my index finger to open the veins in her throat. As the blood poured on the ground, her body twitched and grew still. I sat back on my haunches and indulged in the glorious torment of surveying my prize and feeling my mouth water. Then I used my claws to cut away the hide and carve chunks of venison. My first mistake was cramming my mouth full of meat. Almost as soon as it touched my tongue, it turned bitter, like ashes on my tongue. I gagged but swallowed the lump, only to have it lodge painfully in my narrow throat. I had to force a long claw down my gullet to snag it and pull it free. Lesson learned, I carved thin strips of meat and, bypassing my traitorous tongue altogether, slid them down my throat. It did not work. My tongue was coated with bitterness and I nearly vomited. My belly hurt so much, however, that I continued forcing down strip after strip. Suddenly, before my hunger was eased, I doubled over in pain. It felt as though a hand had seized my innards and was trying to pull them out my navel. It took hours for the pain to pass. I staggered back to my rooms, clutching my belly until dawn. It occurred to me that after starving for several days, it might take some time for my stomach to become accustomed to plenty. I decided to return to the carcass and feed again, this time more slowly. All right, and that's about 10 minutes right there.
All right, so next up we have Jessica Levi. Jessica, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I'm going to read from my book. There's that groovy cover. The Night Library of Sternendock. It is a vampire romance, that I wrote in Pushkin sonnets. This was a story I wanted to tell for a long time, and I couldn't quite find the right way to do it until I read Pushkin's Eugene Onegin, and it was like, where has this book been all my life? So I decided to give it a shot. So it is going to rhyme. I'm going to read you the prologue, which introduces all the characters and describes the first time that the heroine, Kunigunde Heller, meets the Graf, which is a German word for count, the vampire of this story. So here we go. By 7, Kunigunde saw plainly the burden she would grow up with. Her name, romantic if ungainly, and knowledge vampires weren't a myth. The Heller clan for generations had hunted such abominations, and very few were left alive that summer night in '55 when, at her grandmother's insistence, her mother stuffed her in a new pink dress and Oma drove them to the castle looming in the distance. There she would meet at 8 o'clock the vampire Graf of Sternendock. Such visits are about tradition and not a pleasant social act. They satisfy but one condition of many in a solemn pact. In 1897, Hellers slew Graf and Gräfin in their cellars. The new Graf, ruling in their stead and wishing no more people dead, proposed a compromise that stated no vampire might, to sate his needs, cause death for those on whom he feeds. The Hellers too cooperated and as consideration swore they'd not slay vampires anymore. The two sides signed a treaty saying that anyone who breaks this peace will find himself or herself paying a fatal price for that caprice. To keep this grim arrangement going, one extra thing is needed. Knowing the Hellers are but mortal, one, a woman, serves as liaison, succeeded later by her daughter. The one who rules the family now is eldest of this party, Frau Lucia Heller. She has brought her one grandchild up to be prepared to take a role she can't be spared. Lucia's mother, called Maria, first set these women on this path, conceding to the Graf's idea to save her people from his wrath. This took no small amount of will. Her own father was the old Graf's killer. Lucia has her mother's hair. In all else, she's her grandsire's heir. More patient, though, more calculating. She knows her enemies by heart, has mastered many weapons art, and seldom smiles. Participating despite her hatred seems a way of keeping other pain at bay. Now Eva, Kunigunde's mother, her husband was Lucia's son. They loved their child and one another, but Eva's dreams were come undone the night he took his father driving and crashed with neither one surviving. For Kunigunde, Eva stayed and tried to learn the family trade. Alas, she has no stomach for it. She firmly grips her daughter's hand and gives in to the Graf's demand to meet. She knows she can't ignore it and wishes she had strength to fight. Someday she may, but not tonight. Amid this roiling family drama, young Kunigunde chatters. Does the castle have a princess, Mama? She wants to know. What interest is her Oma's spite, her mother's worry? The castle beckons, hurry, hurry. The last of sunset's golden glow receding from the town below is gone, but gets a grand revival as towers loom and turrets rise against the star-strewn velvet skies. It dazzles her at their arrival. She gets one final look before they sweep her through the castle door. They're not in yet. The room before them is simple, well secured and small. An iron safe is waiting for them behind a panel in the wall. The women, as is necessary, remove the weapons which they carry as heirlooms and as points of pride, and place the pistols safe inside. They do not carry stakes. Though charming, Their rustic, rough-hewn quality ill suits the present century. Most hunters nowadays are arming themselves with guns, which, like as not, they load with custom wooden shot. These precious guns now locked securely away, Lucia takes the key. "Good evening, Timmick," she says. "Surely you'll come out now where we can see." He steps out from the shadow lightly and greets Lucia, nods politely, then shows the way with outstretched hand. The child knows Timmick is no man. A vampire in the Graf's retainer, he's seen 300 winters pass. And there's no fighter in his class, her Oma says, though he looks plainer than she'd have thought. A poor surprise, this vampire first to meet her eyes. Their footfalls echo in the quiet of hallways lined with tapestries. A candle winks as they walk by, it sends shadows dancing, and she sees the figures as alive. The glinting of gold thread, its richness hinting at fairy story opulence, appeals to 7-year-old sense. When Timmick stands aside, revealing His Excellency's private suite, she almost cannot keep her feet. And yet it's not the painted ceiling, the draperies or cornices that draw her gasp, for there he is. If Timmick's only ordinary, his lord looks every inch the part of vampire prince. His height, his very demeanor serve to touch her heart with frost. He leans against a table in formal suit of gray and sable, with only one chromatic note, the red silk knotted at his throat. He turns toward them. Is she staring? Does she sense something just beneath his smile which does not hide his teeth? He has a graceful, noble bearing, but Oma gave her this advice. There's none alive who's crossed him twice. "Good evening, ladies," and his voice is as smooth as glass and just as fine. "What can I offer you? Your choice is some coffee or perhaps some wine." Lucia is the first to answer. "I beg you, spare this courtly dance, sir. We understand why we are here since you required we appear." With narrowed eyes and sour expression, he says, "It is a true delight to have you in my home tonight." He softens. "Ava, you're a vision. How kind of you to come." But she looks wistful at his courtesy. "So this at last is Cunegonde," the Graf says in his silken tone. "Just 7 years. It is a wonder how in such time the child has grown." Although his presence may have jarred her, he kneels now better to regard her and asks for only her to hear. "How do you like my castle, dear?" It makes her feel a little braver, the gentle way he asks, and soon she sheds her diffident cocoon. His eyes upon her never waver. He listens to his youthful guest describe the part she likes the best. "What's that?" she asked. The vampire rises and turns to look, then gives a laugh as he sees what so tantalizes the child, a volume bound in calf and tooled with gold. He reads the title, "The Stars of Sternendach, a vital retelling of our country's lore. Perhaps you've seen its like before." He opens to an illustration of knights and princesses below an astral vault and bends to show it her. She nods appreciation, but says to him, "And now I need to hold the book so I can read." He hesitates, but she's insistent. He says, "Then take it for your own." Lucia's face shows she is resistant to this largesse their host has shown. She says, "If this concludes our meeting, you must excuse us. We'll be needing to take our king home. It's late. Might Timmick lead us to the gate?" The Graf, ignoring her, releases the book to Kinga's eager hand and says to her, "Now, understand, this work contains some favorite pieces of mine. Enjoy them, little one. I'd like your thoughts when you are done. For now, good night and pleasant dreaming." And so her heart completes its thaw. She clasps her lovely present, beaming, her fear of him transformed to awe. She curtsies like her mother told her, and only once looks over her shoulder to watch the Graf recede from view. Once Timmick leads her family through the halls, Lucia stops to gather their weapons, and like that, it's done. The ride home is a silent one. A tired Cunegonde would rather stay up to read, but in the car's back seat, she sleeps and dreams of stars. Thank you. So that is the prologue. And if Carrie would be so kind as to drop the link in the chat to jessicalevi.com, you can find all the pre-order information and
It's already in there.
It is there. I knew you were on top of this. Thank you. So you can go there and you can find links to that and the other stuff I've written. Thank you.
And we are going to talk about where you can find the books when we get to the Q&A too. So we'll make sure to mention all of that as well.
Cool.
But thank you very much, Jessica. Next up, we have Kimberly Meyer.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. And thank you other authors. And thank you, Carrie, for facilitating. This is Murder at Constellation House. It is a cozy supernatural horror mystery with a tinge of cosmic horror because I like it. It's set in seaside Newport, Rhode Island, and Newport is home to Gilded Age mansions. And rather than set it in one of the mansions that exists, I built my own in here, and I set 2 mysteries in there. So there are 2 timelines. One is during the Gilded Age and follows the inventor who created the mansion and his bride who disappears under mysterious circumstances. And then there's one, the other is in 2015, and an extortionist is found murdered on the grounds of Constellation House. And why he is dead, why there is a serial killer out there going to kill 3 more, and what it has to do with the Gilded Age is all within. So I'm going to read just the first diary entry from the inventor, and then I'm going to read chapter 1. So here we go. From the archive at Constellation House, Saturday, September 16th, 1876. This evening, at her parents' table, Clara laughed off my quest for the light antagonist. A distinguished guest agreed and called it a grand farce not grounded in actual science. They all snickered at my folly. She has gone too far. The opposite of light is out there, shielded from our view by darkness, but not of it, the light antagonist. I will prove its existence once and for all when I build the agiscope to measure its wavelength and particles. Clara will marvel at the proof of this unseen force and see I am right. It is not her fault that she opposes me. The charlatans in our set have her ear and whisper that all mankind's needs have been provided on Earth. I say they can have Earth. God gave me a universe to explore, and I want her by my side for the journey. Clara Parker, I do not want to break you to my will, but I know my duty. This is a poor way to begin a marriage. Chapter 1. Grant Travers angrily checked his phone and saw there were no new messages from his kids. He swore under his breath, parked his smoke gray Mercedes on the shoulder of Ocean Avenue next to Almy Pond, and sent a text. Vonnie, I have the right to talk to my kids on Sunday evenings. Do you want me to drag you back to the lawyers? The phone lit up immediately, even though it was close to midnight. Please relitigate. Let's see if anything new emerges in the proceedings. This time he screamed a futile curse, but no one heard it except some crickets along the quiet stretch of road. His divorce had been an absolute loss. Vonnie got the kids, kept her fortune, and moved to Nantucket, a long drive and ferry ride away from him, and he had no leverage to get anything back. The moon was bright as Grant got out of the car and checked his reflection in the side view mirror. A dissatisfied, pudgy, pink man in his early 50s stared back at him. He didn't like what he saw, except that the shiner around his right eye was nearly gone. He patted out the shiner and started to calm down. Vonnie may currently have the upper hand, but he could do something about this indignity. Roger Deacon has it coming now, Grant thought with a smile. He locked the car and walked the quarter mile to Constellation Point in near darkness with the stars shining brightly above. The peaceful cadence of frogs and cicadas soothed his wounded ego and gave him time to prep for the night's interaction. Be firm but fair, he told himself. A mansion was an odd place to receive a payout, a bit too dramatic. But he had learned long ago to give his mark some wiggle room. They needed some comfort so they didn't feel trapped. Animals without exits do desperate things to their captors. Even as a boy, he had instinctually understood the art of blackmail. After watching his older brother Terry get pummeled when he stood up to the school bully, Grant had decided to take a different approach. He had researched the bully's address and quietly listened under the kitchen window. The bully's grandparents were raising him because his parents were drug addicts. A quick word in the bully's ear the next morning, and none of the Travers children were bothered again. The best part was the Evel Knievel action figure and stunt cycle the bully gave him right after Christmas to finish the deal. All through middle school, after which the bully transferred, Grant never asked for more than their original bargain, nor alluded to it. He had gotten what he asked for and had kept the secret. Even back then, he knew victims needed to live their lives without his specter hanging over them after he was paid. Never get too greedy was his mantra. He silently approached the wrought iron gates and formidable sandstone walls surrounding Constellation House, enjoying how the gates twinkled in the moonlight. He purposefully walked past them to the small gatekeeper's door. As promised, the chain that locked the door had been cut. Grant quietly pushed open the tiny metal door, slipped through the thick sandstone wall, and was startled by the loud crashing of the waves on the other side. It was as if the walls held back the fury of the sea from the outside world, and it took him a moment to regain composure. He surveyed the manicured grounds leading up to the dark stone bulk of the mansion, but saw no signal light. That's odd. He's clearly here, Grant muttered, and started toward the observatory on the far end of the point. He kept alert for any sign of his mark. And then, with a plastic crunch, he tripped. He threw his arms up to protect his face as his body broke a slew of plastic objects. Startled and spread-eagled, he illuminated what had impeded his progress with his flashlight app. Dozens of plastic pink flamingos. Grant giggled hysterically and turned the flashlight app off. He stared at the stars for a moment and enjoyed another giggle. Petty, thy color is pink, he said, groaning as he got up and brushed off. It was unbelievable to him that preservationists were sticking lawn ornaments into each other's gardens, but here they were. One of the more ridiculous, variably kept secrets of Newport's buttoned-up preservation societies was that they pranked each other. It was a good outlet for their disdain. Otherwise, they might burn all the mansions down. The Guild would never forgive the Trust for showing up and opening Constellation House, siphoning off tourist dollars and publicity. With any luck, Grant would be able to use the squabble to his monetary advantage. Maliciously, he wondered if Jessica Greenleaf would admit her role in this bit of cross-preservationist sabotage. He hoped she wouldn't. When people refused to own up to the terrible things they did, it gave him leverage, and that leverage was going to make him $50,000 richer tonight. A flash of light glimmered in front of the observatory. Relieved, Grant picked his way through the flamingos and around some topiaries. By the time the observatory came back into view, the light had disappeared. Getting annoyed, Grant walked up to the observatory and smacked the window. How dare he toy with me? Outraged, he turned and looked out at the choppy ocean, taking a deep breath. His shadow appeared at his feet, and he turned around to see a glowing shape in the window. Was the deal supposed to take place in there? He peered inside and saw a figure walking through a door at the far end of the room and turning into the hallway, out of sight. He pressed his nose against the pane to get a better look at the dark interior. A horrified face, stark white and illuminated from within, appeared behind the glass with a finger pointed at him. Its mouth was open in a scream that he couldn't hear. He jumped back in shock and his head exploded in pain. A figure dragged his body behind the topiaries. Thank you.
That was great, Kimberly. Thank you very much. And then next up, we have Michael Whistler. Michael, you're on.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's really exciting honor to be here and to hear all these stories and meet some authors. So, yeah, my name is Michael Whistler, and I do write science fiction. I have a couple of novels out. And I'm particularly drawn to science fiction because I believe it's a genre that's uniquely equipped to help us wrestle with some very philosophical, big questions. And I think it's also an important genre and becoming more important as we advance as a species and become more technologically advanced and add more complexity to our lives and eventually start adding technology literally into our bodies. There's a lot of interesting things that science fiction has been wrestling with for decades that we're now starting to wrestle with in our daily lives. And as such, I think it's going to become even more important of a genre for us to contemplate some ethical questions about where we're headed. So as such, I love exploring that and do that through writing and through discussing science fiction books and movies and whatnot. So I hadn't planned on this, but I learned earlier this evening that we could, if we wanted to, share screens. So I thought, why not take a moment and actually do that, if that's okay with everyone. Let's see, I don't know if it'll, oh, there it is. Gotta find the share button. And hopefully you can see my screen now. So this is my website and kind of my whole mantra, as it were, science fiction and examining life, using it as a sort of philosophical launch pad. But in particular, I wanted to draw attention to just the two books that I'll discuss tonight. It's a little easier than trying to hold up the covers and whatnot. This is Unidentified. And in a little bit, I'll also read a little bit from Sleepwalker. So I just thought I would share that briefly. And let's see, I think, there we go. Maybe we're back to not sharing, computer being a little slow. But a little bit about Unidentified, the first novel that I got to publish. It's very sci-fi meets horror, actually, and in the vein of the X-Files, maybe with a touch of The Conjuring in there. The synopsis for it briefly is that it's about alien abduction, UFOs, a supposed case, at least, of alien abduction. The lead FBI agent in charge of the investigation doesn't think it's alien abduction. She sincerely believes there's someone using the suggestion, the idea of alien abduction as a means to get away with kidnapping and murdering, ultimately. And so she's determined to keep this from happening again in a small town in New Hampshire when similar sort of events start taking place that led to the last disappearance of a person there. She enlists the help of her psychiatrist, of all people, to try to debunk the idea of UFOs and aliens and really try to get into the psychology of who is doing this and why. Well, needless to say, right, it's a book, so things don't go according to plan. That book is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. It's the only audiobook I have out so far, looking to get more of those out as well. Then my second novel, both of these are published by Dokes News Media, which I hugely appreciate. My second novel is Sleepwalker. It is a cyberpunk thriller, and with a diverse kind of cast of characters. And it deals with the idea of reprogramming the human brain and the technology that would be involved in doing that, and the implications of what might be done with that, when people begin to wield that kind of power, and the idea of rewiring an entire person's personality. So I'll read just a little chunk here from one of the early chapters in Sleepwalker. And just to give a little bit of context as to what's taking place, the main character is a nun named Riley. She's a Mexican-American nun who's living in Brazil, South America, actually in the city I grew up in Brazil, and teaching science at a Catholic school there. The most unusual thing about Riley is that she has a serious sleepwalking problem. Well, it's not generally been serious, but it's getting worse. And actually, at the beginning of the book, she wakes up several blocks from her home in the middle of the night and has to find her way back home, which is quite startling. And not long after that, this mysterious man from America shows up at her school where she teaches and confronts her, sort of lays out this quite bizarre story to her that he understands why she's sleepwalking. He knows her past. And in fact, everything she believes about herself, everything she knows about herself, isn't true. These are all merely implanted false memories to cover up her true personality. And she is, in fact, part of a very clandestine, secretive project that is developing this technology. And she holds some key information within her mind, and he's there to retrieve her. She's not sure what to think of this. Their interaction leads to actually him injecting her with something that knocks her out. The next day, she chooses to start digging into information for herself and try to figure out what's going on. And that's where we'll pick this up. She has just left the library where she's been reading up on some of the things that Thomas, this man that has confronted her, has brought to her attention. And I was going to read on my screen, but I'm not sure. I may have to do this on my book after all, because unfortunately Zoom is slowing things down just a little bit. So I will start right here. So as she is fled from the library and trying to make sure she isn't being followed, she does notice that there's a woman following her, and she ends up confronting this woman and ultimately demanding to know who she is. So we'll pick up right there. "My name is Arisu Anna," the woman said at last. Riley heard the name with all five senses. A chill ran through her, and she became suddenly dizzy. Her back hit the wall as her knees wobbled uncontrollably. Arisu grabbed her arm and pulled her up. "What's wrong with me?" Riley stammered. "It's the neurogenesis fluid that Thomas injected into you. It's taking effect rather strongly now. The more stimulation you have from anything that might connect you to past memories, the more seriously it will kick in. You did some heavy reading back there, and now I'm here. So you'll be pretty messed up for the next several hours. It's quite a lot for your brain to handle." "Well, that doesn't sound like much fun." Riley gave her a weak smile. She returned it. "So does this mean I knew you?" Riley asked. "Yeah, you knew me, but as I said already, that will come with time. Right now, we have to get going." "I think I would rather sit here and rest for a while." Riley's speech slurred as her eyes fluttered. No. We have to go now," Arisu protested, steadying Riley by the arm. Suddenly, a moment of lucidity came over Riley, and she yanked her arm free. "Why should I trust you?" Arisu rolled her eyes. "If you want to make it out of this alive, you have no choice but to trust me, honey." "No," she pushed Arisu away. "I can't keep playing this game. I'm done with this mess, and I can't trust any of you." She tried to back up, but ran into the wall again. Her mind felt as if it swam through thick sludge in an effort to remain conscious. "Just last week, I was a normal gal with a sleepwalking problem." Okay, so that's not so normal, but still, it was just sleepwalking. Oh shit. Riley watched as the ground rushed toward her in slow motion and hit her face. "This looks like it's really going to hurt," she thought on her way down. Oddly, it didn't, though the bright flash of light that she saw inside her eyes when she collided with the sidewalk was quite startling. She didn't pass out right away either. In her field of vision, she saw feet striking the pavement and legs jutting up at an odd angle as people walked by, not too far away from her. And from this strange vantage point, the world slowed and faded into a murky pool of nothingness. So from this point on, Riley basically is confronted with the choice of who to trust, who to believe, as she begins to uncover and live this very morphing reality within her own mind, and ultimately racing against the clock to figure out exactly who she is and whether she can even be of help, and who she should even help in this manner. So that's it's a little bit about Sleepwalker and some of the things I do. If you're curious and want to check out more, actually one of the cool things that I wanted to be sure to mention is right now my publisher Doxa News Media has just a handful of signed copies of Sleepwalker, a hardback copy like this. And it's just on a first come, first serve basis. So if you happen to hop onto their website, which is DOXANOUS media.com, you hop on there, go to their bookstore. They have those available if anyone's interested in grabbing those. I don't know how many copies are left, so it is a first come, first serve basis on that. But yeah, thank you so much for giving me a chance to share a little bit, and look forward to being part of the Q&A time.
Well, thank you all very much. I do want to let you all know if you have any questions, please make sure to drop them in the chat so I can relay them to the authors. We do have a number of the authors' works within our catalog, and we've purchased the remainder. So if you don't see anything in the catalog, just make sure you reach out to us so we can request those for you. But all of the authors are available. Their books are for sale on the major platforms, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, as well as through the authors' websites. So please make sure, if you can, to support them. This is a really exciting program. We're very happy to have them all here with us today. And I do have a couple of questions that have come in from some various platforms. So I'm going to start by asking you all if you can tell us, where is your favorite place to write? Especially during the pandemic, has that changed?
My favorite place to write is in bed, actually. I love sitting up on my side of the bed with my headrest with a long pad paper and just writing in longhand. That's my favorite place to write.
It varies for me. It's more the time of day I write, like early in the day is best for me. I might want to be outside. I might want to be sitting in a comfy chair with the laptop balanced on my lap. I might want to be at a desk. It varies.
Since I can't go to the Richardson room, things being what they are, I guess my favorite place to write would be the kitchen table.
My best ideas seem to come to me when I'm doing something else like laundry, and then I have to stop everything and jot something down quickly, and then I'm right here.
Sorry, my computer being a little bit slow tonight. Yeah, I guess my favorite place for me is often anywhere where I can get some quiet. Quite honestly, with a 7-year-old at home, that can be a bit of a challenge. So often, it's early morning and just sit down in the shared office actually before anyone else is in here, and try to get some time to write.
Okay. We have a question for Jessica. They wanted to know, they said you have a beautiful reading voice, but do you have any plans to release an audio version of your book?
Oh, wouldn't that be sweet? I do not have any plans at present. That is up to my publisher. But they have started to branch into audiobooks through Tantor Media. So I've, fingers crossed. That would be nice.
And for the rest of the panel, are your books available in audio?
Mine isn't. My publisher can't afford to do that, but I would love to have my book on audio, but it has not happened.
Okay.
I have
I don't.
Yeah, just my first one right now is available on Audible, and I think several other platforms like audiobooks.com and whatnot. Hoping at some point to get it on Scribd as well and other places like that.
I'm considering actually doing it myself, but it's not done yet.
I imagine that adds a whole nother layer to the writing process.
Yes.
Find all the typos you missed the first time.
No kidding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my next question, how, especially in light of the last year having like upended the apple cart of everyone's day-to-day, how do you manage to build in writing time with all of the various other things that you have? Or is it something that's like fluid? Whenever you get a moment, you just stop and write?
I'm semi-retired, and thanks to COVID, my part-time job at Mass Audubon isn't happening right now. So the only thing I got in the way for me with writing was a long, drawn-out process to sell my house and move. But other than that, I've actually had plenty of time.
It's one of the highlights of my day. We get when we get the toddler down, I get to think about monsters and ballrooms and murder, and I really just look forward to it. So it's easy to build in when it's the highlight mentally.
I find the writing time isn't the problem. It's the sitting and staring at the wall, which is a vital aspect of writing, at least for me. That's the time that I lack, because it's the kind of thing you can't do when everybody is in your space. And I've got 2 kids and a husband who are very much in my space this year. So that's been my struggle. The writing time is great. Coming up with something to write, that's the tricky part.
I find time whenever I can, but what helps me is that I now have an accountability group, 2 other writers who are working on things as well. And so to discipline ourselves, we meet every other week. We send our pages to each other and we critique each other on Zoom on a Sunday afternoon. That's the only way that I can force myself to pivot from the other things I have to do to write, to do my writing.
Yeah, I mentioned writing a little bit in the mornings. It's sometimes easier, some mornings easier than others, but that's how I've been trying to do it. And part of it just maintaining the discipline, taking the approach of at least 300 words a day as the goal, but also taking the approach of that's the ideal and the objective. And if you can write more, great. And if you miss a day, okay, so you missed a day. Let's not waste any time crying over that day. Tomorrow, let's just hit it and start again and go from there. Because in the past, when I've tried to do things like that, and if you think of it cumulative, oh shoot, I didn't write the past 2 days. Now I got to write 900 words today. Then you don't do it, because now it's like, I don't feel like writing 900 words today. But if you just get back at it with, no, I'm going to try to get at least 300 today, then you make progress. So, but yes, Jessica, I relate so much. Like, as an introvert who needs time to let things kind of brew, it can be a challenge when you can't find that sort of space and silence to sort of do that work.
Well, my next question is, since you're all local authors, have you been inspired at all by the areas where you're living or from? I know, Jessica, you mentioned that you like to write in Richardson. Is there any particular place that has really inspired you within your process?
Oh, the Richardson Room, definitely, at the Thomas Crane Library is that in my book, when they eventually get to the Groff's Library, the description is very much the Richardson Room. I added an extra wing, but that was what I had in mind. So that was definitely an inspiration there.
For me, it's more the people I meet and the experiences I have. And I've written about this before, in blogs and stuff. Because I'm a haunt actor, I kind of moved from writing fantasy to writing horror, because when you're a character, at the same time, these ideas are always percolating in my head, starting with what are some really awful ways to die, ways I would not wish to die. And then developing characters I act and characters that become just really bad people in my stories.
I enjoyed writing at Panera Bread before the pandemic happened. I would go there and just have my breakfast there and write, and then have my lunch there and write. And I really was able to get a lot done there. Just being in that around that energy was very helpful to me before the pandemic shut everything down.
So I've gotten to travel quite a bit around the world, which has been a real blessing, but it's given me a real love for the area. I grew up on New Year's Eve, we would go to the Newport Mansions. It was like what my family would do. And we would get to go look at the holiday decorations. And also the Polar Bear Club would jump into the water by this diner. So we would be in the diner and we would watch the Polar Bear Club. It's just this really great memory I have from a few years. So Just the magic of those mansions and the whole thing really stuck with me. I just love the landscape. I love the color palette. I just really love the New England area. So I'm working on my next novel. It's set right now. It's set in Jamestown, Rhode Island. It might move, but I really want to be writing about our area because there's just so much here, and you have the vampire mythos, and you've got everything that happened with the TV and the grave sites, and you've Salem, of course, and there's a lot there.
Yeah, I mentioned in the first novel that I published, Unidentified, it does take place in New Hampshire, in Lincoln, New Hampshire, and that's a place I visited in New England frequently. But there are parts in Boston as well, because there's a Boston-based FBI agent who travels up to New Hampshire to investigate this. And actually, Sleepwalker, though it begins in Brazil, ultimately ends up back in Boston, where this project is headquartered, and specifically up in the North End on Battery Wharf. Is a really beautiful area in this hypothetical near future Boston. The what currently is the Coast Guard facility is now the headquarters of this project. And so I have drawn definitely a good bit of inspiration from the area. And actually the next novel that my publisher will be releasing likely later this year, it takes place in Maine. So also some areas that I've visited up there.
Well, that actually leads into our next and last question for the night. So Kimberly and Mikhail, you both mentioned upcoming works. Does anybody else have any projects that are in the pipeline that we should be keeping our eyes peeled for?
I'm working on a novel. It's just, I'm still in the manuscript stage. It takes place in Boston, historical novel in the mid 1800s, in the Beacon Hill area and the Black neighborhood that was there. And that's during the time of, there were some slave catchers in the area, and a lot of abolition activity going on. So I'm having a lot of fun digging into the history and writing it.
Sounds exciting too. I'm working on a novella. It could end up becoming a novel, but I think it's going to be a novella, but also alternating between that and a lot of short stories. So I'm trying to divide my time as evenly as possible.
I'm writing short fiction when I get the chance, and I've returned to that second long form work, my second novel, which I'm trying to do a spin on a story about prophecies and oracles, sort of like out of Greek mythology, and play a little what if with that. So I'm trying to get the manuscript to a point where I can show it to somebody I'm not married to.
Well, very good. I want to thank you all so much. This has been a really enjoyable program. Thank you all for your time and your dedication and your support of libraries and literacy. And thank you all for attending. Hopefully we will be able to be doing more of these literary events, and we'll be able to have our authors back, talk about some upcoming work. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
Honored
much.
to be here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you,
night,
everyone,
everyone.
for listening.
Hi, thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Hey, Jess.